Hello. Questions I have has to deal with the spiritual and the physical coming together as being as one. The outside becoming like the inside becoming like the outside, the upside like the downside.
We'll be very brief here. It's really what's happening when you think about how all of this that you know as physical is an extension of this non-physical. So it all is one, and everything that's physical has come from the consciousness of non-physical. But now there's so much physical stuff for physical beings like you to observe. Now you keep talking as if it's separate, or in some cases as if the non-physical doesn't exist at all, because the non-physical doesn't look like the physical looks, but it all is.
I understand that it is all one. What I'm trying to understand better is to bring meshing the two together and understanding how to live with meshing the two of them into working together at the same time. When I've been able to meditate and leave my body at times, and sometimes I have problems getting back into my body because if there's somebody else there, and I feel like I have to fight sometimes to get back into it. And sometimes I don't understand. There are so many different aspects of everything.
Well, let's just make this simpler.
That's what I'd like.
So you are a physical body filled with consciousness.
Yes.
What you're talking about isn't what you think you're talking about, because you're not talking so much about the differences in the physical body and the non-physical. What you're really talking about is the perceived contradiction in your own consciousness about what's physical and what's non-physical. It doesn't have to be complicated. Everything that feels complicated is because you're thinking contradictory thoughts about it. That's why it's complicated. We'll start in a very general place. So sometimes people who are considering having an experience like this today, or a conversation with someone who is professing to be expressing non-physical consciousness, they want to have the debate about spiritual versus material. And we want to say that everything that you are wanting to call material is spiritual, because everything that is manifested in this material, see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it form, is consciousness that is expressing itself and being perceived that way. Perception is such an interesting thing. And so we want to talk to you about your perception, because you're talking as if there is a reality that we need to explain to you. And there are as many realities as people are conjuring. And so we're going to tell you a perception story just for fun here. It will loosen things up, and then off we'll go.
Okay.
So Esther has a house in Southern California that looks out. The ocean is off in the distance, not that far. And there's a ravine that is full of trees, and she can see a few rooftops, but there's not too much between Esther's deck and her ocean view. So she was sitting on her deck the other day, looking out, and she began to laugh because her own bushes and trees on her own property line have been encroaching. Really, lots of rain this year, and everything has grown, and she realized she's blocking her own view with her own landscaping. And so when the gardener came that day, she said to him, "Come stand here with me." And he stood there, and she said, "See, about 25% of my view is gone now because of all of these happy plants. Can you trim them back?" And he said, "Yes, but there's a tree down in the ravine that's part of that." And Esther said, "I know, and I don't know if that tree is on my property," because she owns to the middle of the ravine. And she wasn't sure if the tree was 1 inch on her property or 1 inch on the other person's property. So she said, "Watch what you're doing about that, but maybe you could just lace it out so that I can see through it." So Esther was gone the rest of that day. And when she came back, she went up on her deck, and she was knocked over by her view. And as she stood there, she looked out, and there's a neighbor's house over here on the edge, and next to his property line were 2 really large tree stumps, about that big around, big trees. And Esther thought, "What have I done?" She thought that she had had the neighbor's trees chopped to the ground, and it was good for her because she had a really good view. But she thought, that is not what I meant. It's not what I asked for. It was not what my intention was. A couple of days later, Esther is sitting on her deck, and she sees a man standing over at this new house that is under construction. It's a remodel of an old house. And a man is standing looking into the ravine, and he's looking at those stumps. And Esther is thinking, I did that. And then he's taking a picture of those stumps. And Esther is thinking, I'm going to jail. So she got in her car, and she'd never been over there. It's on the other side of the ravine. She didn't even know what driveway led into where that house was. So it took her a little while to find her way in. And she found it, drove in, lots of workers in the house, plastering things. And she said, is the owner here? No, they say. Is the property manager here? I saw someone. Oh, he's gone. So Esther walked into the house looking for him. And he was not there, but she stood out there on the edge of that property, and she could see her property across the way, and she could see these big tree stumps, and she had gone prepared to do whatever it took to make him happy. I'll build you a fence. I'll landscape your entire yard. I'll put poplar trees in here if you want them. Whatever you want, she was prepared to do that, but he wasn't there. So she went home. And then later that day, a friend came to take her to lunch. And so she said, I have to show you something. She said, look what I did. And so he stood out and looked across the way, and he said, those are not new cuts on those stumps. If your gardeners had chopped those trees down recently, there would have been a big mess all around it. And then Esther thought, yeah, that was kind of unreasonable that they could cut a tree that big down in 3 hours. And then she walked out to the edge of the ravine, and she saw the very small little tree that they had cut down and left. Everything they chopped off of it was still. And then she realized all that happened was they cut the branches of the tree that was on her property so that she could see something that she had not ever seen before. Those stumps had been there. She just didn't know they were there. So she thought, boy, I really went off on a wild goose chase on something that wasn't even close to being accurate. And then she began to laugh at herself about how irrational all of that had been. Did she really think that those two very well-meaning gardeners had managed to take something out of that ravine that had a stump that big? And yet it was easy for her to believe when she was just looking through the lens of what she had just asked for. In other words, misunderstanding, misperception, too much readiness for guilt, too much readiness to assume responsibility, too much desire to be the creator of everyone's reality, too much believing that she's got to be the fixer of all of it. There's a whole lot of things going on there that took her on that wild goose chase that leave her standing in a place where she's not going to be so ready to jump to erroneous conclusions again. So we tell you all of this not just to entertain you.
That seems to correlate very much with what exactly is going on with our own property at the same time.
Really?
Yes, very much so.
The thing that you will come to know, and as you do, you'll feel more and more satisfaction about it, is that everything is perceptual, and everybody has the right to perceive. And humans who are so enamored in the reality of things, in the physicality of things, in the translating it through their physical senses so they know that it's real, forget that even though you're looking with your eyes and so forth, what you're seeing is colored by your perception. Your vibrational basis completely controls what you see. That's why eyewitness accounts often have such variation. That's why you can look at the same things and come to such different conclusions. And when you reach the place that you are willing to let everybody have whatever their perception is, and you're no longer trying to push against their perception and replace it with your own, but instead you're working to your own alignment with your higher perspective, which includes all of it, then that blending of the physical and the non-physical is taken care of automatically.
That would be
and that is
allowing.
Say again?
Allowing and accepting that each one individual's perception
is right.
Is right.
Their perspective may be very different from yours. He was not taking pictures because someone had chopped his trees down. He was taking pictures because he was trying to figure out what he was going to do with that retaining wall. Esther jumped to totally wrong conclusions. His body language, he looked mad. He wasn't mad. He wasn't mad. He was interested. She was looking through eyes of guilt. So when you're looking through eyes of anger or eyes of guilt, you don't see clearly. You don't see clearly unless you look through the eyes of source. And you can't see through the eyes of source until you stop looking through the eyes of guilt.
Yeah, I take on guilt very quickly, for some reason, whether I am or not, I just come up with that appearance that I am and stutter and get misconjobulated and just kind of
Well, it
nervous.
doesn't matter whether you call it guilt or blame or anger or fear or worry. It doesn't matter what label you give to it. In every case, it's you looking at it in a way that is disallowing you to receive the broader knowing, understanding opinion.
I understand that because I'm usually there, but I'm taken out of that alignment, or I'm pulled from it very quickly. I'm not strong in it.
We want to speak to this with you because it's the same exact thing. What Esther was explaining to herself and to her friend who's looking with her over the edge, and what she went to explain to the man who fortunately was not there, or by now she would have replaced his entire landscape. What she was trying to explain to him is, I didn't mean to do this. This is a misunderstanding. This was not my intention. I did not mean for that to happen. And that's what you're talking about. In other words, when you know that you're the creator of your own experience, and you understand that you are not creating through your actions, that the step one is where all the creating's happening, the sifting and sorting, knowing what you don't want, knowing what you do want. That's when you're putting everything into this vortex. And then the rest of your creating is about being in that chilled place where you're tuned in, tapped in, turned on, getting into the receiving mode, because when you ask, it is framed up for you in a vibrational sense. And then your work is to relax and allow yourself to receive the thoughts and so forth. And so that readiness to jump to the incorrect conclusion that you are not good, or that you've done wrong, or that you are being misunderstood, that comes from not fully accepting that you can be or do or have anything. It comes from a misunderstanding of how creation happens. And of course, you're all steeped with that because you were taught so many things as you were coming along through life experience. And most of those things that you were taught were not about vibration. They were not about your guidance system. They were not about your alignment with source energy. They were about your interaction with one another. And those who needed or who believed they needed to control you were the ones who were giving you the information. Most people really believe that for them to live happily, they've got to control the people around them. Starts with parents, mostly. You got to control those little buggers or they'll take over the household. In other words, teachers believe it about school too. And most people really believe that it is through action that things happen to them, and that the only way that they can be safe or happy is by controlling the actions of other people who mean them harm. That's the way you teach each other. You teach guardedness. You teach protectiveness. When the opposite is who you really are. The well-being is so dominant. And when you get hold of that, when you get hold of a little piece of that, in other words, Esther's there most all day, every day. But isn't it lovely that she has such a meaningful experience that lets her understand that perception controls everything. What you think is what's dominant in your experience. There's no reality that affects you. There's no realness. There's no truth. There's no fact that affects any of you beyond your perception and belief of it. Wow. Some people would take away from this conversation, well then, are you just trying to get us to put our head in the sand and not face any facts? That we could just make anything up and it would be? Yes. You create your own reality. But your question is such a wonderful question because you're wanting to bridge this reality that is vivid and it is real. Esther argued with us in the early stages of interacting with us. She said, but Abraham, it's true. This negative thing that I'm talking about and pointing out, it is a true thing. And we said to Esther, just because you believe it is true doesn't mean it deserves your attention. The question is is this thing that I believe true something that I want to perpetuate? And if it is, give it your attention. And if it isn't, withdraw your attention from it.